Welcome to Metro Library's Backyard Birding Program with Dr. Jeff Cox of the Tulsa Audubon Society. We are going to talk about a couple of upcoming programs, and then I will introduce Dr. Cox, and then we will get started. We have Dr. Jeff Cox with us today, like I said, of the Tulsa Audubon Society. He began watching birds at age 11 in Wichita, Kansas, back in the last millennium. He developed a passion for birding that ended up with him earning a PhD in ornithology. Then he followed the money and worked for 30 years in IT before retiring 4 years ago. He still enjoys watching birds and has been a member of the Oklahoma Bird Records Committee for almost 30 years. He is on the board of directors of Tulsa Audubon Society and is the compiler of the Tulsa Christmas Bird Count. Twice he has been the captain of a team that set the Oklahoma Big Bird Day record. How many birds can you find in Oklahoma in 24 hours? All right, so without further ado, I will let him get started and he'll start his screen share here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for joining. And I've got a few sounds on here, so I want to share sound. So I hope everybody can now see the first screen of my presentation. Starts out birds in your backyard, sights and sounds. So as Rebecca mentioned, I've been watching birds for over 50 years, and I do have a PhD. And even though I did not use it professionally, I've tried to keep up with things. So I could talk about birds all day, and birds in the backyard is one of my favorite topics. And I will try to not waste too much time listening to my own voice and get through this so that we'll have some time for questions and still get done by around 3 o'clock. So as Rebecca mentioned, there is the chat feature on Zoom, and please just type your questions into there anytime during the program, and she'll keep track of them. And when we get to the end, we'll get started. So birds in your backyard, sights and sound, presented by me. Photos mostly are from Jim Arterburn, who is an outstanding birder and bird photographer here in Tulsa, and he's very gracious to let me use his photos, and he's got some really great stuff. The bird sounds are mostly from a website called Zeno Canto, which is out there on the interweb. So Oklahoma has a tremendous variety of climate and topography, from southern swamps in southeast Oklahoma to Rocky Mountain mesas in the Panhandle. So as of 2019, 484 species of birds were recorded in Oklahoma, which is way more than Arkansas or Missouri, and a little bit ahead of Kansas, which has Kansas, being from Kansas, I keep up with, they have a phenomenally active group of birders in Kansas. So Oklahoma's got a good variety of birds for no bigger of a state than it is. My friend birding guru, Ken Kaufman, says birding is something that we do for enjoyment. So if you enjoy it, you're a good birder. If you enjoy it a lot, you're a great birder. He's a very inclusive sort of guy. I have a couple of additional rules of good birding, which start out with just be kind. Be kind to the birds, be kind to other birders, be kind to all the people you meet while birding. Just be kind, because I think we can all use a lot more kindness these days. But mostly enjoy birding. So the bird I'm going to start with is not one most people have in their backyard unless you live in the country. But it's the scissortail flycatcher, which is our state bird, and it's just a lovely bird. It's one of the best state birds that any state has, because as you know, a lot of birds have mockingbird and the cardinal and so forth as their state birds, which are fine birds. But the scissortail flycatcher, just a great bird. Wow, look at that thing. This is a map of its range. It nests in Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, down into very northern Mexico. And it spends the winter farther south down in Mexico and Central America. So it has a very restricted range. There aren't a lot of places you can go in the United States to find the scissor-tailed flycatcher, and Oklahoma is right in the heart of its range. So it's really a striking bird, and we're glad to have it here. So to more normal backyard birding, you are all familiar with the American robin and the northern cardinal and the European starling. But do you know the American robin and the northern cardinal and the European starling? So we're going to take these three as examples to begin with, just some common birds in your backyard. So the European robin, this is a juvenile robin. This is just out of the nest a few weeks, maybe just a couple of weeks. And it has that very highly speckled breast. And you might, well, is that yeah, it's built like a robin. It's the size and shape of a robin. It kind of looks like a robin, but what are all those spots on it? That's just apparently part of the camouflage the bird has in its nest. And when it molts in a few weeks, it will lose those spots and turn into a bird like this. And if you're lucky, you might. I hope everybody can hear this. The sound of the robin singing. It's got a lovely, very easily identifiable song. Tee-wee, 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 tee-wee. Repeated about 4 times. It's also got these cluck sounds, cluck 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 calls that you may hear pretty much all year round. They're also very, very distinct and very easily recognizable. Robin, you may have, in the snowstorm, did you have snow down there? Did it snow, or was that just in Tulsa? I guess everybody had snow and deep freeze cold weather. And even before that, people had been saying, where had all the robins gone? Or where did all these robins come from? I didn't have any around, and now I have a lot of them around. During the breeding season, the American robin is a pretty territorial bird, male and female, raising their young, and they will protect their territory from intruders. But in the winter, well, during the breeding season, they eat mostly like worms and stuff they dig out of the ground. They mostly eat, they forage off the ground and probe the soil for earthworms and grubs and so forth. So they need to defend their territory for food. In the winter, they switch to mostly vegetarian diet, a lot of berries and fruits that are still hanging on the trees. So they tend to be gregarious. They'll get in flocks of hundreds sometimes, and they are nomadic. They'll wander around from place to place. They are migratory to a certain extent. So some of them that nest here will leave in the wintertime, and some of them that come in the winter from farther north. But there's robins around all year and pretty much anywhere in Oklahoma except maybe out in the Panhandle. But so they will come in and they're just foraging around looking for ripe berries primarily. So if you have holly berries, any kind of berry still on your shrubbery, you're likely to see a flock of American robins descend on your yard one day, and they will hang around until the flock has completely devoured every berry on your property, and then they'll move on to another place. So that's the American robin. One of the birds that sometimes travels in flocks with loosely associated with robins is the cedar waxwing. This is an example, and rightly called the cedar because they really like to eat the berries off of our eastern red cedars. Um, the waxwing, part of their name comes from the red tips, the almost waxy tips that are on some of the wing feathers, give it its name. One of they're a little smaller than robins. They rarely come to the ground to feed. They're mostly up in the trees or in the bushes. They're very handsome birds, and you can see they have this bright yellow tip across the end of the tail. That is very distinct. And the red wax tips, the wax that give it the name waxwing, are hard to see sometimes, but the yellow band on the tail is pretty easy. Sometimes, if they get the wrong kind of non-native honeysuckle in their diet, when their tail feathers are growing out during molt in the fall, the tip of the tail will be orange instead of yellow. So that's kind of a weird thing, an interesting sidelight. So the northern cardinal, we know the northern cardinal has a very, very bright, cheerful song. It's not an elaborate song, but it's pretty distinctive once you get to know it. This is the male on the left and the female on the right. And I hope everybody's able to hear that okay. Just singing along, and they'll sometimes on a warm day in winter, they'll sing in the middle of winter. One of the first birds to start singing or to visit your feeders in the morning, and one of the last birds to visit your feeder and stop singing in the evening. So that's the adult male, the bright red one, and the adult female, no less attractive, if not as brightly colored. This guy on the left here looks like a shaggy teenager, and that is the cardinal analog of a shaggy teenager. That is a juvenile cardinal that has left its nest probably not too many days ago. It's the same size. Most birds are nearly full grown in size when they leave the nest. And you can see it's got the longish reddish tail feathers and the red in the wings, but he's just, the crest is not well developed. The beak is mostly blackish, although it's got a little bit of red on him. He just looks like a not very happy, adolescent. But you'll see these during the summer in your backyard. The one on the right here also mostly occurs in late summer, and people have trouble sometimes getting their heads around what this is. From the neck down, and from the base of the bill forward, it's a perfectly normal cardinal, but it looks like a dinosaur. The head looks kind of like a dinosaur, which birds are the descendants of dinosaurs, so that seems appropriate. But the cardinal, so this is a cardinal that has lost all of its head feathers simultaneously, and that can happen for a couple of reasons. One is there can be an infestation of mites, not mice and not lice, but mites, head mites, that can cause all the feathers to be lost. Or it could just be a matter of the bird simultaneously molting all of its feathers. Most birds will replace all or most of their feathers once a year after the breeding season. And cardinals and blue jays are another one that are especially susceptible to losing all of their head feathers at the same time. And they just look goofy as heck. And a couple of weeks later, the feathers have all grown back in and they're fine. So that's the northern cardinal for you. Now here's a phrase where you can repeat after me: bilateral gynandromorph. Everybody, bilateral gynandromorph. What that is, you may have seen on social media or wherever. This a picture of this bird within the last month or so. This is a cardinal, a bilateral gynandromorph, which means split down the middle. Half of it is male and half of it is female. So this one on the bird's right, which is the left to the left in our photo, is a male, and the other half is a female. And it's just a very striking thing to look at, and it's very rare, but it does happen occasionally in the bird world. But it just takes a while to get your head around it. Some of you may have seen 2 or 3 years ago, there was a cardinal that was had xanthochromosm, where all the red pigment was replaced with yellow. It was a bright yellow cardinal still with the black face patch, but it was that made a lot of news a couple of years ago. But this bird, this bilateral gynandromorph. So just more weird stuff in the bird world to keep your eyes open for. Okay, the European starling is a common backyard bird, darn it. It is not a native species. It was introduced into the United States about 150 years ago, because there were these acclimation societies back east. There are people recently immigrated from Europe, were trying to bring birds they were familiar with to the new world and help themselves feel more at home. There are ample supply of perfectly good North American native birds, but some people had a different idea. And they tend to, the starling population has grown explosively. They've across the continent. The problem is that they're very aggressive, and they nest in cavities and bird houses, and they will prevent native species, which also need those cavities or bird houses, from nesting completely. So some woodpeckers and purple martins and so forth have suffered due to the expansion of the European starling. But it's a common bird, one you should know about. But its plumages that it goes through are even more extreme than either the cardinal or the robin. The one on the left here, the real rather drab looking one, that's the juvenile starling right out of the nest. Yes, it's the same size and shape of the adult starlings. Very different coloration with the kind of a grayish buffy color, kind of light streaking on there, but and the beak is black instead of yellow. So it is but that's a juvenile starling. The one on the right is a juvenile starling molting into its adult plumage. It starts at the back and works its way forward. So sometimes you'll see one, but the back end is black and with white speckles, and from the chest forward is all this kind of a buffy brown. And people really struggle with this because there's no, it's not in my bird guide. It's not in my bird guide. Well, and I've had an argument with somebody on Facebook a year or two ago that she was not willing to accept my judgment that what her picture was of a starling that was a juvenile that was molting into its adult plumage, because the plumage is so different between the different ages. And you can see here on the adult plumage it's getting. The starling has a fairly distinctive song. It's kind of musical. It doesn't follow a set form. It can mimic other species. It doesn't necessarily do it a lot, but it does do some mimicry. There's a good whistle there. It's maybe trying to mimic something it's just heard in the environment. It's a pretty interesting song, and really identify it because it's kind of a weird combination of whistles and other non-musical sounds, and it just doesn't sound like any other bird we have in North America. So the plumage when it first gets its adult plumage, it's mostly black feathers with little white triangles at the tips of the feathers. Oh, that was me. And during the winter, so that will happen in late summer, early fall. During the winter, the white feather tips will gradually wear off, leaving this sleek, glossy black plumage, and the bird's beak will turn from black or blackish into a bright yellow over here. So this one's still got some of the white feather tips on it, but those are all just different plumages of the European starling. As I mentioned, the starling is a non-native species, so just to have a little bit of backyard habitat. This is so a European starling here, a non-native species in a Bradford pear tree. You still see that now. The Bradford pear supposedly it blooms brightly in the spring. It can be visually a very attractive bird. It's very, but its fruits are not supposed to be viable by themselves. But apparently, it crosses with some of the native pears or close species and produces viable tiny pears, which then starlings and other birds will come and eat these tiny fruits and swallow them, digest them, and then pass the seeds on all over the place. And that causes the spread of maybe not true Bradford pears, but near descendants of Bradford pears. And within a couple of weeks, probably, if you drive around out in the country, you may see, pastures with little shrubs growing up that are just covered in white blooms, and that's the spread of the Bradford pear by the European starling. I am no friend of Bradford pears and believe they should not be planted anywhere. Not going to argue with you if you want to plant them, okay? But just that's my opinion, and that of many other people also that are trying to preserve our native bird and wildlife populations. So another non-native species is the house sparrow. And I'll go ahead and it doesn't really have a song. It's got these kind of chirping calls, which are pretty distinctive. We've got the adult female here on the left and the adult male here on the right. And you may have them in your yard and they'll come to your feeders, and they, like the starlings, are cavity nesters, and they can be pretty aggressive and driving woodpeckers and wrens and sometimes purple martins out of their own houses. Back when they were introduced in the 1870s, I think, in the New York City area, it was to control inchworms, little caterpillars that were devouring the leaves of some of the trees there, and just they would defecate all over the sidewalks and stuff, and people didn't like that. So I thought, well, house sparrows in Europe, they eat caterpillars. Let's bring in a bunch of house sparrows. So they did, and people were excited. They built these huge, elaborate house sparrow mansions, and they'd go down to the city park in the evening and watch the sparrows coming and going. And it was quite a social event also. And people realized that as house sparrow numbers increased, the native species populations decreased. But the genie had left the bottle, and couldn't get her back in. So house sparrows have spread nationwide. Their population has declined somewhat over the last 40 or 50 years, but there's still like 500 million house sparrows available in the United States. So they're not a species we need to worry about. But it's just I guess one point is that the introduction of non-native species into any environment rarely has a very good outcome. I mean, it's just doing it because you think it's a good idea is probably, it's not. Okay, I'm just telling you, it's not. Okay. Similar name, at least the first part of the name, the same. Another common backyard bird is the house finch. And it's got this kind of a sweet musical warbling song. It has a little burr to it. It's not pure whistled notes. It's got a little bit more to it. This is a male with the brick reddish color on the left, and a female with the kind of dull no face pattern, kind of brownish streaks on the breast. So the house finch is a pretty interesting story. Well, I think it is. Surely you'll find it interesting also. The house finch is native to arid lands of the western United States. They used to be common into Colorado and New Mexico and farther west, and into western the panhandle of Oklahoma back in the 30s. Because of their song and because the pretty colors of the male, it was a pretty widely kept as a cage bird in the 30s and 40s. And there were some pet store or one or more pet stores on Long Island in the 40s. By that time, the United States government had passed various laws restricting to protect our native populations of birds and restricting what birds it could be kept as cage birds, and the house finch pretty much got left out of that. So the pet store owner just since he couldn't keep them legally, he just turned them loose on Long Island, and it took a while, but gradually the birds bred and established a population there. And it took a couple of decades before they really started to spread westward, but eventually they started expanding pretty rapidly westward and southward. At the same time, the western populations were moving eastward. So they got to Oklahoma City from the west by about 1984, and they came into Tulsa from the east by about 1987. And somewhere in the middle, they met around 1990, I think. So as far as whether we have the eastern ones in Tulsa, and the western ones in Oklahoma City, or we have, some hybrid swarm all over western Oklahoma, or what, I don't really know right now. But there are house finches all over Oklahoma, and they're common. And they're nice birds to around, and they are, out west they're native birds. Out east they're kind of not quite so native, but I kind of give them a break there. But one of the things that has been a problem with house finches, if you notice this one sitting on a feeder and its right eye is completely shut, it cannot see at all through one eye. It's because it's got a fungal disease called house finch disease. It's specifically a Mycoplasma gallisepticum. It's caused by bacteria, excuse me, that can accumulate on bird feeders when they're visited by sick finches if you don't keep your feeders clean. So house finches are by far the most common victims, but it can also strike goldfinches and various other finches. So if you have an active bird feeding setup at all, you really need to keep your bird feeders clean at least once a month. If you have a lot of birds, take down your feeders, empty them out, take them apart, and you can see this feeder. Most feeders now are made for easy maintenance, so you can take them apart and clean them. This one's got screws on the side, so you can take out the bottom, soak it in a dilute bleach solution for 10 to 15 minutes, and then scrub it pretty well. You don't have to scrub it real thoroughly if it's been allowed to soak in a good bleach solution. Let it dry thoroughly before you put it back up. And if you have a lot of accumulated shell debris and bird poop on the ground, you need to clean that up also, because the bacteria can thrive in that environment. Another thing, if you don't get a lot of birds, don't fill your bird feeders and just leave them full. And where they get rained on, and then the water gets inside, and the fungus and bacteria start to grow in the bottom, and then it's a real mess to clean out. Don't put more food in your feeders than the birds can eat in a week at the most. So just keep if you're not getting enough birds that empty your feeders every day, keep them, don't fill your feeders quite as full, keep them only about half full or so. So, but this kind of raises a question is, why do we feed birds at all? And I would say that for the most part, feeding birds does us humans more good than it does the birds. It's a benefit to a lot of people, especially in this past year of pandemic when a lot of people couldn't get out much. I think a lot of people have spent a lot more time watching their bird feeders, or if they hadn't had a bird feeder before, they've been putting up bird feeders. So it's just, even if you're homebound and can't get out, it's still a connection to the natural world to be able to watch birds at your feeder. But there come every now and then certain weather events, like we had last month. Heavy snow with sub-zero temperatures, or if we have a heavy ice storm, that's the other thing that can really cover up food that birds are looking for and prevent from finding the food that they need to survive. And when the temperature drops below zero, a lot of birds just don't find enough food to survive on. And I've read, I don't know how many reports of people with dead birds that just starved and froze to death in their yards or all over the place. So during these really severe winter events, feeding the birds really does help the birds a lot. It's really a good thing. Bird populations fluctuate up and down. Long term, it's the birds we lost this year. For most species, it's not, especially this. The birds that are here now are pretty hardy, and they'll mostly recover. But it doesn't hurt to give them a little help. The other thing that birds really need, even in winter, is open, clean water. When it's below freezing, all the water is frozen. If you can get a heated bird bath, or put some kind of a heater in a bird bath, the birds will continue to come to the bird bath, even in sub-zero temperature, because the air is so dry, and if they're eating seeds, they're not getting water from insects that they're eating, so they need that water. But if you have water, make sure you keep it clean, and clean your bird baths at least as often as you clean your bird feeders. One of the common backyard birds we have is the American goldfinch. This is a male on the left in breeding plumage, which they are just starting to molt into right now. There's a female on the left, and for all intents and purposes, the males in winter look pretty much like the females. Even I have a hard time telling them apart sometimes. Females look like this. The brown or somewhat drabber pretty much all year round. The males in breeding plumage, wowzers, and that's a great bird. And goldfinches will sometimes travel in big flocks. They are here year round. They don't breed in great numbers in Oklahoma, but there are some around. But that's when you'll see the males. But in winter, this winter, people have seen flocks of hundreds coming to their feeders, just all day long coming to their feeders. They're lovely birds. This winter, we've also had some what we call eruptive species. And these are oops, let me back up. The red crossbill, we haven't had a lot of them, but you can see the beak, the upper and lower mandible are actually crossed, and they use that to pry open pine cones to get the seeds that are inside them. Since we don't have a lot of pines growing in Oklahoma, we don't have too many red crossbills. But this year, due to shortage of pine crops, I think in the areas where they breed, they they have moved south and west from the boreal forest and the mountains, and there have been some seen in Oklahoma. The pine siskin is a close relative of the goldfinch, about the same size and shape. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. A lot of pine siskins this winter. The red-breasted nuthatch is a smaller cousin of the white-breasted nuthatch that we have every year, all year. There have been a lot of those this winter, and the purple finch, which there's some around most winters, but not a lot. This winter, there have been people who reported 30 or 40 or more. So you may have had purple finches at your feeders this year. So to tell, they're the same size, close relatives of the house finch. So the male house finch is more of a brick red rather than the raspberry purple of the purple finch. House finch has the streaks on its belly. Purple finch has a few pale streaks on its side, but really unstreaked. And it has kind of a face mask, a dark patch through the eye, and one here on the whisker and up on top. The female house finch has an unmarked face. They both have streaked breast, but the female purple finch has same dark stripe through the eye that the male has, light stripe above the eye and a light stripe kind of extending backward from the beak. So the striping on the head is very distinct in the purple finch, absent in the house finch. Pine siskin, like I said, close relative to the goldfinch. Heavily streaked, and it has a yellow flash in its wing when it flies. If you have bird feeders, you're gonna have birds like to feed on the birds you're feeding. So the Cooper's hawk is one of them. It's a pretty large bird, the adult on the left and the juvenile streaked on the right. Smaller bird is the sharp-shinned hawk. Again, the adult with the reddish barring on its breast. On the right here is the streaked brown on the breast. That's the juvenile or the immature. Smaller, robin to blue jay size, and the Cooper's hawk is almost crow size. The female Cooper's hawk. So there's really not much overlap in size, but a large sharp-shinned hawk is about as big as a small Cooper's hawk. So the intermediate one's going to be hard. Cooper's hawks nest in Oklahoma, so they have them pretty much year round. Sharp-shins mostly in the fall, in the winter. Blackbirds, you may be starting to see some flocks of blackbirds in your yard. One of them that's nice is the red-winged blackbird because it's got these nice red wings. Some people will see, if you go out in the country, you may see flocks of hundreds of thousands of them. I hope you don't have a flock this big in your backyard, but it happens. But in the springtime, they do this song spread display where the males will perch in a bright, conspicuous area and display the red on their wings while they're singing to attract the females. This bird is one of the most confusing birds in Oklahoma. People always ask, well, what's this big sparrow? I mean, I guess it's a sparrow. It's big, but it doesn't look like any sparrows. And this is the female red-winged blackbird. When it's with the males, it's pretty easy to tell. When it's by itself, it looks like a big sparrow of some kind, but it's got the same size and shape, and the beak is somewhat conical, but it comes to a nice sharp point. It's got this nice white eye stripe, and heavily streaked, uh, completely, throat to belly. So it's getting close to springtime. The vernal equinox is in less than 2 weeks. I think it's on the 20th this year. So I'm gonna wrap up with a couple of springtime birds or summertime birds. The purple martin, which purple martins are already being seen in Oklahoma. Not a lot, but the first scouts have come in. There's the male on the right and the female on the left. They spend the winter in Amazonia in South America. And as daylight lengthens after the winter solstice, gradually they start working their ways up north through either Caribbean islands or through Central America, and they get to Oklahoma by late February. The earliest ones. Most of them won't come in for till April or sometime, but be on the lookout for them. And it's a great backyard bird. It does take some work. They originally they nested in cliffs, not in cliffs, but in hollow trees, dead trees with holes in them. The Native Americans, some of them apparently would raise gourds and put those out around their campsites to attract the purple martins in. And the early European colonists kind of picked up that habit, and they've carried on. And it's a lovely bird to have around, but maintaining a purple martin colony is a lot of work because you have to keep the houses clean, and you have to keep out the sparrows and the starlings. So that's the male. It's got a what I think just a cheerful song. They're fun to listen to. So like I said, they're fun birds to have around. The purple martin. Another bird that will start coming in soon is the ruby-throated hummingbird. I don't know that there's any reports in Oklahoma yet, but they will be here. First ones will be seen within a couple of weeks. Another great yard bird. They spend the winter mostly in Central America, southern Mexico. Some of them will migrate north up through Texas, but a lot of them will come up through the Yucatan and fly across the Gulf of Mexico, 700 miles to the Gulf Coast, and then work their way up throughout eastern North America, eastern United States, and southern Canada. This is the female. They like to feed on flowers with a reddish or orange flowers with an elongated corolla. That is a long, narrow tube-like flowers like this native trumpet creeper. But people like to feed hummingbirds also, and that's great also. If given a choice, I think the hummers will go to the plants before they'll come to feeders, but they'll come to feeders in a minute. So a little advice on hummingbird nectar: 4 parts water to 1 part granulated white sugar. Don't use brown sugar or honey or anything else, just granulated white sugar. We don't need any additives in it. Boil the water, add the white sugar, mix it up, dissolve it, let it cool down, put it in your feeder. You don't need any red dye, just the sugar in the water. As long as there is some red on the feeder, the birds will find it. And once they find it, they don't care whether it's red or not. But be sure, like with your seed feeders, but more often the hummingbird feeders need need the nectar changed, and they need to be cleaned out every 4 to 5 days. When it's cold, you can maybe go a week or so. If it's hot, there are, bacteria and fungi that grow in there. And even if they're not too harmful to the hummingbirds, which I think the jury is out on that, and it's ugly and it just makes them harder to clean later. You don't need to go to the store and buy commercial made nectar. If you want to buy nectar, okay, but don't get it with red dye. The evidence on the harm by red dye to hummingbirds is not great, but it's not a good thing. It's not anything they need. As long as there's red on the feeder, the hummingbirds will find it. And that's all, folks. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back, see if Rebecca wants to take over.
Yeah, great. Thank you so
And,
much. That was lovely. Really appreciate having you here.
I am
I
happy to
really
be here, and I want to thank you all the listeners for sticking with me. I hope you've enjoyed it.